John Semyonovich? John Semyonovich. Cheerfully confirmed the old man. You were recommended to me as the chief specialist, Alekin smiled. I want some advice about cucumbers. For an appetizer? The old man joked. Not without it. Alekin laid out 5 cucumbers on the workbench, including 2 with bitten ends. What can be said about them? The old man quickly divided the cucumbers into 2 heaps. Dalzik, tape, Dalzik, Traku. Local varieties. Dalzik is local, and Truk is the Baltic, beyond Vilna. Trakai district. They don't grow it here, that's for sure. Yes, sir. With a guarantee. Do you identify them by the shape and color of the greenery, by the run to the stalk? Yes. Are you a vegetable grower? The old man perked up. Amateur. Alekin smiled and pointed to the cucumbers. What do you think? When are they plucked? Dalzik, fresh, yesterday, and maybe today. Did you buy it at the bazaar? And the truck, he looked at the cucumbers with bitten ends. It all depends on the storage conditions. 3 days at least, if not 4. And why do you need it? Thank you, Ivan Semyonovich. Alekin gathered cucumbers and laughed it off. Let's put a debt for a snack. In the office of the head of the City Department of State Security, flooded with morning iridescent light, besides the major himself, there was also a swarthy, long-haired lieutenant. You were interested in the Pavlovskys, said the major, picking up a small, greasy piece of paper and handed it to Alekin. This note, baked in a pie, was tried to be transferred to the old man's cell. Who? His sister. Here is the translation. Alekin took a piece of paper, then a piece of paper with Russian text and read. Joseph. May God help you. Julia returned yesterday. The girl is healthy. We pray for you. Your sister Zofia. Who is Julia? Alekin asked. We don't know yet. Get busy and report back, the major ordered the lieutenant. Let's. The lieutenant took both papers and put them in his folder. Listen, if you go from Shilovichi to Kamenka, the first farm on the left, near the forest, who lives there? Alekin asked Major. From Shilovichi to Kamenka, the first farm on the left, remembering, the major repeated and said to the lieutenant who had already approached the door, we were at his place. Remember, he treated us to moonshine? Okulik, the lieutenant called, turning around, and asked Alekin, why do you need him? He was connected with the partisans, the major remembered, opening the folder with papers, and ordered, what do we know about him? Share with the captain. 22, Lieutenant Colonel Polyakov. In the districts of Lida and Grodno, he had 3 search groups. There were also small, but very responsible cases that he did not want to delegate to anyone. But the most important thing on this trip was visiting 2 points on the radio game, 19, on one of them, near Lida. Tonight the cargo and the German agent were to be received. Polyakov himself started this game almost a year ago, and it was conducted, by the nature of disinformation, very boldly, and in this boldness lay its immeasurable value and at the same time the danger of failure. The risk increased with each week, with each radiogram transmitted. All this could not continue indefinitely, and the lieutenant colonel decided to be present tonight, considered himself obliged, not only because he wanted to be the first to talk with the landed agent, but also because today instead of containers and a man a dozen fragmentation bombs could well have been dropped on the fires. This also happened. For Polyakov, who at one time, in just 2 hours in an autumn forest near Vyazma, persuaded the newly caught radio operator and the senior group to cooperate, immediately entrusted them with the first broadcast on his own responsibility, composed a legend for them and made up every single one. Reports, this game was a native brainchild in the full sense of the word, and he thought about it this morning more than anything else. Having left before dawn, during the 3 hours of the road from the directorate, he never remembered the radio with the call signs of KAO. He switched over and thought about her only when, before reaching Kamenka, the driver slowed down and he saw a Studebaker standing in front on the side of the road and near him 2 prisoners of war, submachine guards, and 3 officers. He knew only one of them, lame after being wounded, a big-headed captain, an interpreter for the counterintelligence department of the army. Taking a voluminous aircraft tablet, Polyakov jumped out of the car. Although he was inclined to think that those wanted by Alekhine's group were paratrooper agents, the other versions should not be neglected. Alekhine was physically unable to cover everything. He wanted to help him in any way possible. And last night, when a message came about the liquidation of the remaining enemy group, Polyakov immediately figured that he would be able to carve out an hour and a half to 2 hours on the way, especially since in his busy, mostly armchair lifestyle, an investigative experiment was being carried out, establishing the exact place where the German radio went on the air and the search for physical evidence there. It was, one might say, a rest, a walk in the fresh air. Separated prisoners of war, the lanky Staub, the ingratiatingly obliging staff sergeant major, and the stocky, squat Gain, the silent, gloomy cook, soldier, pointed out the same clearing at the edge of the forest. Polyakov ordered officers and submachine gunners from the security company to carefully inspect the surroundings, and he himself, with the Germans and the captain translator, took up the area directly, where, according to Gain and Staub, the core of the group was located. Die Bar mit dem General war hier, said the tall, thin German, pointing with his hand. Die Funkstelle befand sich in diesem Gebüsch. Und ich war in der Sicherung der Truppen. He says that the stretcher with the general was standing here, the captain translated, the radio was located in these bushes, and he himself was on guard over there. I understand. The radio was located here, Polyakov remarked, rummaging through the grass with his eyes. Ask them how they scattered the antenna. We were die Antenne angespent, the interpreter asked. Haben Sie es gesehen? 20. The small man shook his head negatively. Nothing. 21, the long one hastily said, stretching his arms at his sides. Skinny, with sunken eyes and cheeks, in a dirty, darned uniform in many places and broken shoes without laces, he looked rather pitiful. He was walking beside Polyakov, diligently inspecting the grass, and suddenly, with a cry of joy, he rushed under a bush and picked up a German battery. He ran up to Polyakov and, clicking the metal rims of his heels, handed him the battery and said ingratiatingly, I am a mechanic, I worked in a factory. 22. Power for the radio, the captain remarked, examining the battery in Polyakov's hand. So they don't lie. There's no need for them to lie now, Polyakov said, peering under a bush, and picked up a piece of wire with a small fork. This is also from the radio. Funk, funk. Colonel, please consider that I am a mechanic, a worker. I have 3 children and I absolutely have to go back. 23. The squat German looked at him frowningly with contemptuous hostility. What a scent, Polyakov remarked, inhaling the air, divine. What does he want? Afraid of being shot. He asks to take into account that he is a mechanic, in a word, a worker. I understood that, Polyakov said, looking around the clearing. The radio was deployed here, but it doesn't make it any easier for us. In order to exclude or, conversely, accept this version, we need to decrypt the interception. The encryption notebook was not found at the place of detention. He certainly was here. Try to find. But where? Perhaps the notepad was abandoned or lost along the way. All of you, together with them, Polyakov pointed in the direction of the Germans, you will have to go through their path. Move in a chain for all 40 kilometers. How is it with your leg, can you stand it? Yes. The captain blushed. Smell every blade of grass. Particular attention to the places where they arranged halts. And if the cipher is destroyed, burned? I don't think. Staff documents are intact. Try to find. 23. Search in the morning in the city. Early in the morning, when, after having breakfast, they went out into the street, Timantsev broke through. He suddenly interrupted Alekhine and, flaring his nostrils, said excitedly, What are you all saying, should, must? We need decryption text. And without a text, you can stick around until the second coming, like blind puppies. There will be a text, the captain promised. When? Exclaimed Timantsev, inflamed. Moscow has been unable to unwind the interception for the 10th day, and we take the rap. 9th, Alekhine corrected. Did you get up on the wrong foot? I'm with that one. Timantsev got angry. Don't make me a fool. We're ugly like beans. You can't tell Moscow, but they won't leave us alive. Briefly speaking. What do you suggest? You have to dance from the text, You are afraid to demand a decryption from the office, and they are drifting in front of Moscow. Zerlik Mannerlik. I can't and don't want to. Moscow has 12 fronts alone, but will they remember us? They must be taken by the throat. Let me call myself, at least to the general, at least to Moscow, at least somewhere. I didn't care about subordination. We do not play spillikins and do not hunt for squirrels. This is a matter of national importance. And we have an iron position. Let me call. Yes, I will spin their brains so that they will not collect everything. No, not everything. Andrei would be ashamed. I'm not telling him, I'm telling you. Noted, Alekhine said imperturbably. Spitting in rage, Timantsev grabbed the edge of the side and jumped into the lorry. Then, puffed up, he was shaking in the back next to Andrei, offended. When the car stopped to drop him off, Alekhine, stepping on the footboard, said, "A lieutenant colonel should be in the Air Corps counterintelligence department at 12 o'clock. You can tell him everything." Timantsev silently jumped off and, without looking back, walked down the street. Andrei and the captain drove on. The morning was as fruitless as the evening. Andrei got the city center and the market. He walked the streets, from time to time pushed through the bazaar, looked closely at all the military, and at the same time at the civilians, not a single similar face. At the bazaar, among the buyers, more precisely, the buyers, there were also military men, but most of all there were peasants. In rusty homespun marinars, in kerchiefs, caps and Polish uniform caps with lacquered visors, they crowded around the carts, walked along the rows, asked the price of everything, bought little, just from clothes. Russian, Belarusian, and more often Polish speech was heard. Selling all sorts of things, from potatoes and live pigs to Catholic icons and military uniforms. Hundreds of packs of Lithuanian and German cigarettes, homemade cakes and candles, sweets, half-smoked sausage and buns flaunted on the stalls of professional traders, here under a bright tempting sign, buffet. Lunches like at Mom's, they sold hot dishes and fragrant moonshine, bimber. Private trade in the liberated cities surprised Andrei. He could not understand entrepreneurship. The bourgeois, as he imagined them in books and movies, probably looked exactly like those well-fed people behind the stalls. NEP, Timantsev explained authoritatively. Some revival of private capital and speculators. The time will come, they will be so pressed, the sky will seem like a sheepskin. Like yesterday, it was oppressively hot, the heated air was motionless. Having paid 20 rubles, Andrei drank a bottle of poisonous red water on saccharin and again went to the streets of the city. He stopped before reaching the crossroads, seeing on the other side of the street, at the shady palisade, a couple noticeable for their beauty, a girl in a medical coat and a white cap and a tall, dapper lieutenant. Well? The voice of Timantsev came out from around the corner next to Andrei. Nothing. No prostration, Timantsev said understandingly and looked at the couple. They fall in love, people live. We should have detained them yesterday at the sea checkpoint. They teach you, Timantsev grimaced in annoyance. You understand, we need their connections, we need facts, evidence. Yes, maybe they were not even in this forest. Or maybe they were, but they are not related to the radio we are looking for. And if, for example, they must be taken red-handed, conclusively. Or figure it out and exclude. And you are all the same, grab the bags, the station is leaving. For a few seconds they were silent. The couple on the other side had already broken up, the girl left, and the lieutenant stood with a sad face and smoked. The cat ran between them, said Timantsev. He considered himself an outstanding psychologist and physiognomist. Or at least a kitten. Do you think they're in town and will find them? I think. They must, a small town. Keep your head up. He patted Andrew on the shoulder. The ball is round, where will they go? 24. Operational documents. Cipher telegram. Very urgent. Igorov from Moscow, August 16, 44. Reporting the decoding of the interception in the Neman case, I propose to take active measures to search for and detain the agents and immediately stop the work of the transmitter. Judging by the text, you are dealing with a large qualified residency, acting with the task of operational intelligence in the rear of your and adjacent fronts. Obviously, the observation of the railway on the Grodno-Białystok line, shuttle routes Vilnius, Białystok, via Grodno, and Vilnius, Brest, via Lida, Bridges, Folkovisk, are not excluded. 24. Report on the progress of the search and all the activities you carry out daily. The application is mentioned. Kalibanov. ZB number 1604 Neman. Interception from August 13, 44. KKK. For the last 3 days, at the Grodno-Białystok section, on an average of 22 to 25 echelons, with troops and equipment passed. In the opposite direction 5 to 7 sleighs, and empty. From the Baltic states, to the Vistula, to the districts of Warsaw, and Dublin motorized pontoon bridge units, with TMP parks, and H2P, divisions of the RAM-13, and M31 are transferred. To Brest proceeded the 473rd Battalion of Amphibious Vehicles. In Białystok, Grodno, Vilna, born 1895 to 1927 were called up. Your instructions have been forwarded to the notary. Batteries and forms are urgently needed. Kravtsov. Note on HF. Urgently. Lida, Polyakova. I am reporting the decrypted interception of August 13, 44 and the search orientation for Pavlovsky. The radio with call signs KAO deserves the most serious attention. Think and report what else can be done. Stay for a day in Lida to activate the search, provide practical assistance to Alekine's group and organize the capture of Pavlovsky. Igorov. Note on HF. Urgently. Lida, Polyakov, Alekin. According to the orientation of the GUKR Smersh number 9.651 of July 27, 44, an agent of German intelligence Grabowski, aka Volkov, aka Trofimenko, aka Pavlovsky Kazimir, aka Ivan, aka Vladimir, patronymic Georgievich, and also Iosifovich, 1915, is wanted. R. Harvest. Minsk, secondary education, former member of the Komsomol, instructor and activist of Osoaviakim. In 1936 to 1939 served in the radio engineering units of the Moscow Military District. Before the war, Pavlovsky's mother was allegedly sentenced for anti-Soviet activities to 10 years in prison. The father, a German by nationality, lives on one of the farms in the Lida district, Baranovichi region. Pavlovsky himself at the beginning of the war, being a sergeant in the Red Army, went over to the side of the Germans with weapons. In the spring of 1942 he graduated with honors from the Königsberg School of German Intelligence. In 1942 to 1943 9 or 10 times he was transferred to the rear of the Red Army, a radio operator and a senior reconnaissance group. In 1942, near Moscow, at the moment of detention, shooting back, he killed an officer of the commandant's office and 2 patrols. Since 1942, inaccurate, Volksdeutsch. For the successful completion of the tasks of the Abwehr, he was awarded the Iron Cross 2 degree, silver and 2 bronze combat medals. He is fluent in small arms, defense and attack techniques. Particularly dangerous when arrested. Verbal portrait, height, tall, figure, medium, hair, blonde, forehead, wide, eyes are dark gray, oval face, eyebrows, arched, wide, the nose is thick, straight, with a horizontal base. Has no catch marks. In the middle of July with In a group of agents, also dressed in the uniform of Soviet officers, was at the German intelligence crossing point in the town of Dölwitz near Insterburg, East Prussia, waiting to be transferred to the rear of the Red Army. Cipher telegram. Urgently, Igorov. Today, August 16, in the rear of the Corps, north of the town of Zabolody, the remaining enemy group of 9 people was surrounded and, after refusing to surrender, was destroyed. As part of the group, in addition to 2 Germans, officers of the 1C Department of the headquarters of the 9th German Army, Captain Erich Jeb and Lieutenant Helmut Still, 7 Vlasevites advanced westward, 3 of them in the form of a ROA, without insignia, and 4 in Soviet military uniforms with epaulets and Red Army books of sergeants of units of the 1st Belarusian Front, apparently captured from the Soviet soldiers they killed. During the liquidation of the group, 8 assault rifles were taken, including 4 PPSH, 9 pistols, 15 grenades, as well as a German-made short-wave transceiver, manufactured in 1943, in working order. Among the documents found, digital code tables, recoding notebooks with used sheets torn out, large-scale German topographic maps with the route from the Bobruisk region marked on them, personal letters and photographs. Judging by the notes in Captain Jeb's notebook, on the way the group monitored the railway twice, in the first case for 3 days, in the second for about 2. Observation points are not indicated, and it was not possible to establish them. As is clear from the route, on August 12 or 13, the group proceeded along the northern edge of the Shilovichi forest area, where, judging by the mark, they made a halt. It is possible that the radio we seized is the wanted transmitter with the call sign KAO. Bonyachenko. Cipher telegram. Urgently, Bonyachenko. Take the radio and all the documents of the liquidated group to the investigative department of the Directorate immediately. Igorov. 25, at noon at the airport. You wanted to dance from the text, dance. Alekin said gloomily to Timantsev and took the cigarette offered by Polyakov. Thanks to. The 3 of them stood at the jeep on the edge of the airfield, near the 1-story building of the counterintelligence department of the Air Corps. Polyakov held several sheets of paper in his hand. He had just read to Alekin and Timantsev the transcript of the interception and the orientation about Pavlovsky. Allow me, Timantsev asked Polyakov and took a piece of paper with the text. You look forward to it like manna from heaven, Alekin remarked with annoyance and lit a cigarette impatiently. Thank you. And the first intercept, from the 7th of August? With that, obviously, a delay, Polyakov sniffed displeasedly. The order for an extraordinary decryption applied to both. Obviously, the delay. The cipher is complex, and they probably also changed the key. I will call and remind you. Qualified intelligence report, Timantsev said, examining the text. Is that all? Observation of transportation, of the railway. Timantsev did not give up, looking at the text and thinking hard. This must be a residency. Is that all? Alekin did not let up. Well, in Moscow they also think so, Polyakov said with almost imperceptible irony. He looked at the second sheet and read, judging by the text, you are dealing with a large qualified residency, acting with the task of operational intelligence in the rear of your and adjacent fronts. Obviously, the observation of the railway on the Grodno-Białystok line, shuttle routes Vilnius, Białystok, via Grodno, and Vilnius, Brest, via Lida, Bridges, Folkovisk, are not excluded. Is that all? No, why? Polyakov looked at the text. Report daily on the progress of the search and all the activities you carry out. Yes, you can't make a fur coat out of this, said Timantsev, returning the sheet with the text. By the way, territorially Białystok and everything south of Grodno is the 2nd Belarusian front. But everything else is ours. And they go on the air with us. There is a place for the radio to go on the air, there is a text and some evidence, but there is nothing to catch on to, Polyakov said leisurely, as if arguing aloud. It's bad. Of course, observation of the railway, and not visually, from the outside, but somewhere at the stations. It's like they're looking under a tarpaulin, Alekin remarked. Routers or flaneurs? 25, asked Timantsev. he loved concreteness, certainty in everything. Obviously, stationary observation. 26, Alekin suggested, looking at Polyakov. The best mask for flaneurs and minibuses during the war is the uniform and documents of military personnel. In the initial period of the Patriotic War, flanking along the railway junctions of the front line was often carried out by German agents under the guise of evacuated citizens. Most likely, combined, said the lieutenant colonel. These are experienced, knowledgeable people. Judging by the text, not the Germans and, obviously, not the Jews. I told you, paratrooper agents. Exclaimed Timantsev. Perhaps, said Polyakov evasively, he, as always, did not want to cut off other versions until the last. Moreover, they are connected with the agents left by the Germans to settle down. Let's try to establish at what points the observation is being carried out. Here we need an analysis of the movement of echelons along all these lines. Everything related to the analysis of movement, I take upon myself, Polyakov declared and looked at the next sheet, now Pavlovsky. Regardless of whether he is related to the radio we are looking for or not, he must be taken. Without wasting time and certainly alive. And those who are with him, too. Timantsev will have to entrust this. And who will I have left? Alekin tried to smile. I have no other solution. Let's give him 2 men from Golubov. Perhaps a well-thought-out, carefully organized trap or ambush is needed, act according to the circumstances. But get on with it today, without delay. At the same time, he shifted his gaze to Timantsev, do everything you can to find these 2 who were at the farm yesterday and deal with them before evening. The owner of the farm is a certain Okulik, said Alekin, he is characterized positively. During the occupation he was associated with the partisans. There is nothing compromising on him. All the better. If you go about an ambush, drop by and talk to him. 26, Alekin. I stopped by Okulik on the way, but he was not at home, and I did not manage to talk to him that day. We simply did not have time to organize a thoughtful, carefully prepared trap, in order to somehow furnish and develop Pavlovsky's connections. The real thing was the arrangement of an ambush in the places of the probable appearance of Pavlovsky, more precisely, in one of the places, we would not have had enough people for more. I first of all imagined such a place as the northern edge of Kamenka, where Pavlovsky's aunt, Zofia Basiyata, lived near the outskirts, his only close relative in the area. The thought of her did not leave me all morning in Lida. I thought about her most of all when I arrived at the Kamensky farms. I was lucky with the local policeman. Not young and not very literate, he possessed a peasant's sharpness, memory and cunning. He was a partisan in these places, knew many here, and kept in touch with the peasants, and talked to him more willingly, and more frankly, than with me or with any stranger. Having taken off my cap and shoulder straps, I worked under the guise of a police officer. However, I did not introduce myself to anyone. We had more than enough reasons to talk with the locals. 4 days ago, not far from Kamenka, a military vehicle was fired at, the driver and accompanying person were killed, about 40 sets of military uniforms were stolen from the back. Recently, night thefts, mainly products, from barns and cellars have become more frequent in the district. In 2 cases, the dogs had previously been poisoned. They took away mainly flour, lard, and in one place they managed to carry away a wild boar weighing 10 pounds without noise. The owners did not even wake up. And there were a number of different cases: underground midwifery, drunken fights, forgery of documents, an attempt at self-mutilation in order to evade mobilization, and the like. Frankness, of course, we were not spoiled. Everything that I managed to learn was formed bit by bit, gleaned in conversations on abstract topics, and in what I heard there was no unanimity necessary for clarification and rechecking. The information was largely contradictory. It is noteworthy that Pavlovsky Sr. and his sister Zofia Basiyata were characterized by the majority positively, while Svirid was spoken of as an unkind, petty, selfish and envious person. I met with him and talked one-on-one. He looked out from afar on the field, crept up unnoticed and called out from the bushes. He behaved more calmly and incomparably more restrained than at the first conversation in the hazel. He obviously closed himself, he did not say anything, only answered questions in monosyllables and, as I felt, very reluctantly. Moreover, I got the feeling that he was biting his elbows. Why did he say too much to me last time? What prompted him to do this the day before yesterday? Patriotic motives in this case, I ruled out. Envy? Greed? Dislike? Hatred? Feeling of revenge? A rather plausible psychological construction suggested itself. Pavlovsky and Svirid are the same age, one is strong, prosperous, according to the concepts of a hunchback, the other is physically handicapped and unsuccessful. Both envy and hostility are possible here, they are in Svirid's character, but this, so to speak, is a permanent, long-term factor, a reason. And the reason, the push? All this seemed to clear up when, in conversations at the farms, I learned more about Yulia, the very Yulia who was reported in the note sent to the prison to Pavlovsky Sr. That she was a farm worker for the Pavlovskys, I found out from the district police officer on the way. And then it turned out that she was nothing less than the younger sister of the hunchback's wife, Bronislava. What I learned about her bit by bit looked like this in general. Antoniuk Yulia Alexeyevna, born in 1926, Belarusian, Catholic, native of the village of Belitsa, Lida region, 2-grade education. Orphan, from the age of 13 in the service of the Pavlovskys. Allegedly, it was mercilessly exploited by Pavlovsky Sr. According to other sources, he treated her like a native, very well. Fainea, 27, this was noted by almost everyone. During the occupation, she dressed deliberately slovenly and dirty. As if she didn't wash her face for weeks to avoid the Germans' harassment. According to other sources, she secretly met with some German and had a child from him, a girl of 1.5 years, her name is Elsa. Be that as it may, during the occupation she had some kind of Ausweis, 28, a document that helped her avoid being sent to work in Germany, or maybe Volksdeutsch Pavlovsky Sr. defended her. In the first days of July, before the arrival of our troops, she allegedly left with the Germans for Germany. In any case, she was absent for about 1.5 months. I returned 2 days ago in the evening, about a day before my first conversation with Svirid. As it turned out, after Yulia's departure, Svirid took all her things to his hut, and upon his return he did not want to give something away. Obviously, because of this, there was a scandal the day before yesterday, when I went to his house. Yulia was not there, but the tear-stained women, Svirid's wife and his old mother, I believe, persuaded the hunchback to return everything as it belonged. It is noteworthy that he, who last time, on his own initiative, declared that he had photographs of Pavlovsky in his house, and himself promised to bring them to me, now said that he could not find one. The photographs were necessary for the search, and, feeling that this man was most affected by fear, with a wolfish, probably expression on my face and a frank threat, told him that he obviously wanted to deceive the Soviet authorities, and so, this will not work. I assured him that everything he told me about would remain between us, but if he did not help us further and did not immediately bring Pavlovsky's photograph, then let him blame himself. He does not even imagine, I threatened, what will happen to him then. Such brazen intimidation, as I expected, turned out to be very effective. In any case, a few minutes later he brought and gave me 2 good, distinct photographs of Pavlovsky. They should have been reshot and reproduced. That would have been easily done in the Air Corps Counterintelligence Department, but first they had to be shown to Timantsev. I had already sent a car for him to Lida at the station, as we agreed, and I was looking forward to it. Not only because I wanted to share my thoughts with him and listen to him, but also because it was necessary to choose a place most suitable for an ambush before dark, and the decisive word here, of course, was his. Regarding the place for the ambush, behind him, as for the choice of the object of observation, behind me, and here I had no right to make a mistake. He was supposed to arrive any minute, and I was still thinking. 27, at the barber shop. The head was breaking from the sun and stuffiness. Stubbornly moving his overworked, cast-iron legs, Andrei reached the crossroads. On the opposite corner, in a house knocked together from boards, there was a hairdressing salon of the Vontorg, During the day Andrei had already looked into it 5 times. He did not want to go over to the sunny side, and for some moments he hesitated. Then he crossed the street, went up to the porch, to the threshold, and discovered the very lieutenant whom he saw yesterday at the farm, at the edge of the Shalovichi forest. The lieutenant was sitting in an armchair, and the foreman, a black-haired, narrow-chested old man with a large hooked nose, was cutting his hair. Andrei involuntarily looked around the street. Who would he consult with? Although he knew that neither Alekhin nor Timantsev was nearby. Then he sat down on a bench on the porch and squinted at the open door. 3 shabby wooden armchairs were placed by the tables with mirrors. In addition to the dark-haired old man, there were 2 more hairdressers, a fat one, already in years, but fast, with countless curls on her head, and a very young pretty girl in a clean, neat dressing gown and boots. To the left, at the very entrance, a hanger was nailed, then 5 servicemen were waiting for their turn on chairs placed along the wall. A thin, long-faced military doctor with the shoulder straps of a captain in the medical service. He was reading a newspaper. The junior lieutenant is a pilot, comely, plump-cheeked, still quite a boy. A foreman, also from aviation, dressed very smartly, in summer officer's uniform, with a tablet on a long belt, and 2 artillery soldiers. The 6th, the tank sergeant, behind whom Andrei took a turn, was smoking near the doors. Pavlik Fedotov from the 25th, the foreman aviator told the young pilot, yesterday he shot down the 30th Fritz. Man! He exclaimed enthusiastically, raising his thumb. He will drink 2 liters, and like a cucumber. Next! Wiping her sweaty face with a handkerchief and sighing, the plump hairdresser called. She obviously suffered the most from the heat, but she worked faster than an old man or a young one. Your turn, the military doctor said to the foreman. I pass. Smirking, the foreman casually announced and pointed with his eyes at the pretty girl, I'm waiting for the master. The military doctor hurriedly folded the newspaper and, taking off his glasses, sat down in an armchair. He did not want to shave, and, squeamishly looking at the not-so-fresh bed sheet and the fat hairdresser's dressing gown, he explained in detail exactly how to cut his hair. Andrei slowly examined the lieutenant in the mirror. He, with a rather phlegmatic look, somehow relaxed, sat under a white sheet in an armchair, leaning back, putting his hands on the armrests and from time to time half covering his eyelids. The dark-haired master, slowly working with scissors, cut his long blonde hair. The lieutenant had a glorious simple face, large bright eyes. As it seemed to Andrei, there was something thoughtfully tired in them. Andrei recalled that in the division where he fought, in the neighboring regiment there was a Nachkim, surprisingly similar to this lieutenant. The poor fellow was blown up by a mine, he was blown to pieces. The sweet smell of cheap perfume floated through the open door from the barber shop. There, in the closeness, it was even worse than on the street, and it was difficult to breathe. Dozens of flies buzzed importunately, striving to perch on sweaty faces. The foreman from aviation was quietly but animatedly telling the young pilot about air battles. He listened with obvious interest, was more silent, only occasionally assenting or smiling knowingly. It was a conversation of the elite, densely interspersed with special aviation terms and accompanied by the expressive gestures of the foreman. With the movements of the palms, he very clearly depicted various air combat maneuvers. Judging by the conversation, he was a knowledgeable and experienced person. He had occasion to shoot down Messerschmitts and Junkers, bomb Königsberg and bombard German trains from the air. He spoke about the famous pilot as if he were his close friend and communicated with him every day. He spoke freely and confidently about various aircraft systems, like a pilot who personally tested their flight and combat qualities. He knew absolutely everything, and it was only incomprehensible in what, in fact, aviation he served, in fighter, assault, or bomber. Imperceptibly examining the lieutenant's face in the mirror, Andrei tried to determine whether he was listening to the conversation or not. It was quite obvious that the lieutenant showed no interest either in what was happening in the barbershop or in those who were in it. His expression was indifferently languid and even a little sleepy, perhaps because he, too, was exhausted by the heat. From time to time, turning his head, he looked at his hairstyle in the mirror, twice touched the hair on the back of his head with his hand and said something to the master. When the lieutenant looked in the mirror, Andrei, in order not to meet his eyes, looked at the posters pasted on the walls of the barber shop. One of the posters, "Chatterbox is a godsend for a spy," hung in a conspicuous place, between the mirrors, and, perhaps, the most catchy, attracted Andre's attention. An elderly worker, putting her finger to her lips and hypnotizing with a stern, persistent look, warned, "Don't talk." These two words were printed in large letters at the bottom of the poster, and in the upper corner it was written, "Watch your back. On days like this. Eavesdrop on the walls, far from chatting and gossip. Before betrayal." Taking a comb with cotton wool, the dark-haired one combed the lieutenant's hair, made a few more movements with scissors and, having examined his work from different angles, brought from the closet where the kerosene was burning, an aluminum glass of boiling water, a brush, and just as leisurely as everything he did, began to edit the razor on the belt. Out of breath, an elderly artillery captain with a wand in his hands entered the barber shop and cast a frown on everyone. As it turned out, having taken the cue earlier, he went off somewhere and, returning just in time, immediately sat down in the middle chair with a full hairdresser. And there is nothing suspicious about him, Andre thought sadly, looking at the lieutenant. Nearby, a talkative foreman, without stopping, told the young aviator. The 27th was transferred to Białystok. Here is the city. True, the center is beaten, but women. The foreman smacked his lips enthusiastically, only now Andre noticed that he was tipsy. This is with our Dunka once, twice, and in Kings, he declared with conviction. But no polka. Give a gentleman, affection, approach. There are different ones. I fall down to the shoulders of the Pani Shanavni, Sheprasham, Pani, kissing the Ranchi, 29. And also a carload of all kinds of haberdashery. You will sweat many times. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. This is not our Dunka for you. He stroked his fur, and purred. No. Get around. A thin approacher is required, with turns. And so, easily, you will not rustle. The captain artilleryman, who had only been soaped on his face, turned round and looked sullenly at the sergeant major. He, without noticing, continued to talk about the peculiarities of wooing women in Poland, about some Berezkin from the 6th fighter and about the incident that happened to this pilot when, after taking a sip of post-flight for the entire squadron, he left the airfield for Białystok and drunk, blew a bubble, 30. The foreman could not keep silent at all. Leaving Berezkin, he spoke about the new, just received Yak-3 fighters. If he had a very low opinion of some other aircraft and called them nothing more than oaks, coffins, and even shit, then he spoke of the new fighters with praise and painted their merits in every possible way. Stable, agile, in control, like a feather. But the main thing is speed. Not a car, lightning. Somehow 650, and these are not seeds, absolute superiority. And they are incomparable in maneuver. Handle on yourself, melts in the sky. And the weapons have been strengthened. Tell me, do the Germans have such a car? And I never dreamed of. Here's the ringer. Andre thought with annoyance. Well, what is it, pulling his tongue, or what? You have a pimple here, the dark-haired lieutenant informed the lieutenant, smiling guiltily, inadvertently hitting him with a razor near the ear and noticing a drop of blood. From the 13th and 25th also went for new cars. They will catch up with these yaks or, maybe, they will get Law 7, and the Germans will not see the sky. Exactly. This is not your 41st year. Pushing aside the fat hairdresser who was shaving him, the gunnery captain, with soapy suds on his face and a napkin on his chest, got up at that moment from his chair and stepped towards the foreman. Get up! He demanded. The foreman, not understanding, got up, the planchette dangling from the tops of his smart boots. Trepak! Suddenly said sharply, or rather, shouted the captain. With your language, not to serve in aviation, but to graze cows. Get out of here. The masters turned to the noise. All red, the foreman continued to stand for some time, then slowly walked to the exit and, catching the sympathetic look of a handsome hairdresser, stopped half-turned at the door and tried to smile. The smile turned out to be confused and unnatural. All swagger and glibness immediately flew off him. After standing like that for a second, he left. The junior lieutenant, the pilot with whom he spoke, blushed like red. Everyone was silent. "You can anoint me with iodine," the lieutenant said softly in the ensuing silence to the old master. He paid less attention to this little incident than others. He was busy examining the cut and was visibly worried. "And then, don't worry," the black-haired man helpfully remarked. "Let's make it the best." The gunnery captain sat down again in his armchair and, twitching his head and nervously adjusting the napkin at his collar, said indignantly to the hairdresser, trembling and trembling, like a grandmother. "Disgusting to listen to. And right. We women are so talkative," the hairdresser suddenly said out of place in a sing-song voice, smiling playfully and rather stupidly. "Everything is from our simplicity, frankness. And we always suffer for this. You are frank," the captain said gloomily and with irritation. "Damn ratchet. Snot lout." He could not calm down. "I know your simplicity," he patted his neck, "I experienced it in my own skin." And, running his hand over his shaved cheek, he asked in the same angry, excited tone, "Do you think he flies? Some kind of clerk? Or twirls the tails of airplanes at the airport?" And I blundered in the heat of the moment. He, slovenly, should have been sent to the commandant's office. Meanwhile, a hot napkin was applied to the lieutenant's face, a compress. "I'm behind you," Andrei reminded the sergeant, getting up. "Now I'm coming." 28. Here is the second one. Coming out of the hairdresser's, the lieutenant, trimmed and prettier, glanced at his watch, lit a cigarette, and leisurely walked towards the station. Andrei followed him at a considerable distance. Like most of his peers, the lieutenant glanced with frank interest at the girls and young women he met, stopped at a movie poster, read it, tried to talk to a thin blonde, but to no avail. He went on. He looked rather carefree, but he did not forget to salute, and he did it clearly, with the ease that distinguishes military servants for more than a year. At the railway crossing, he threw a cigarette butt, which, like the match before, was immediately furtively picked up by Andrei. In the whole appearance of the lieutenant, in his figure, face, gait, behavior and uniforms, there was nothing remarkable or unusual. As they say, there is nothing to stop the eye. During the years of the war, Andrei had to see dozens, if not hundreds of such young men in military uniform. Following the lieutenant, Andrei went to the station square, where several cars were parked along the picket fence. "Comrade Colonel," a voice was heard very close by, "permit me." Andrei turned around and literally 2 meters away saw Timantsev standing at attention near the lorry and next to him 2 unfamiliar grinning officers, the captain and senior lieutenant, as Andrei guessed, seconded. "Guilty," Timantsev fooled around. "Allow me to ask, why you haven't left yet?" Not paying attention to the prompting, Andrei was surprised and, calling Timantsev with a gesture, pointed with a glance at the lieutenant walking ahead, about 40 meters away. Timantsev looked and immediately became serious. "Where did you get it?" "At the hairdresser's." "Well done." Timantsev had already made up his mind and, turning around, ordered the 2 officers. "Wait for me." He and Andrei followed the lieutenant. He went to the end of the station, where a round-faced captain was standing near the canteen of the food station, obviously waiting for him. "Here's the second one," Timantsev said delightedly and looked at his watch. 3 minutes to 4. Presumably, they agreed to meet here. The captain and lieutenant dined for a long time, about an hour, apparently in no hurry. Meanwhile, Timantsev and Andrei were lying on the grass behind a small wren, about 50 meters from the dining room. In the shade, there was no place nearby, suitable for observation. It was necessary to roast in the sun again. Timantsev carefully examined the cigarette butt, then compared 2 burnt matches, thrown by the lieutenant and found in the forest in a clearing. They turned out to be different. "All these are facts," he sighed and, carefully wrapping the cigarette butt and matches in an old letter, put them in a plexiglass cigarette case and put them in his pocket. "You stomp all day," he remarked after a while, and it's like you don't do anything, but you get tired like a dog and get hungry. What did you eat? Not. And me too. Timantsev greedily sniffed. It seemed to him that the smell of meat borscht was coming from the dining room. Now something sour, he said dreamily, like a roasted pig. With horseradish. And a beer would be a couple of bottles with ice. Andrei landed his hand on the nettle and, rubbing the burnt place, examined the sky. Well, Zarin. As if there were no thunderstorms. You won't be fed up with a thunderstorm. And they are having lunch, Timantsev continued, nodding in the direction of the dining room. Today there is meat borscht with tomatoes and goulash with pasta. Such goulash, you will lick your fingers. How do you know? But I don't know, I just think so. Yes, it wouldn't hurt to eat. As Comrade Mechnikov said, food is the most intimate communication between a person and the environment. And he was thinking. Timantsev twice approached the food station from the side of the kitchen and looked into the large hall lined with long tables, but did not dare to go inside. They were feeding the march echelon. The canteen, as well as the station in general, was crowded, but there were only a few officers. And it was not worth the risk to conduct surveillance in the room itself, especially since the chubby captain and lieutenant were sitting at the table alone. When, after dinner, they left the dining room, only the lieutenant lit a cigarette. The captain was apparently a non-smoker. With a slow gait of people who had had a hearty meal, they went to the nearby propaganda center, where, sitting at the open window, they read newspapers for about 15 minutes. Leaving Andrei to watch, Timantsev went to see his acquaintance, the assistant to the station commandant, who was nearby, in the checkpoint building. After waiting for the observers to leave the propaganda center, Timantsev called the assistant commandant to the window and showed him the officers. He said that he was probably seeing the lieutenant for the first time, but he seems to have met the captain at the station, but he can't vouch, because, they say, thousands of officers pass by every day and you can't remember everyone. Why do you need them? He asked. I would like to know who they are. Just? The assistant commandant chuckled. Now I'll invite them and we'll find out everything. No, that's not good. 29, at the station. On the tracks of the station, where there were 7 military echelons with people and equipment, there was a noisy revival usual for a frontline railway junction. Soldiers and sergeants crowded in groups between the trains, on the platform and around, chattered, ran with bowlers and flasks, dragged buckets and tanks with brew, dined, cracked seeds, danced, played, bug, washed and even washed. Shrill shrieking, the shunting engine was moving, beside the carriages, smacking the wheels with hammers and slamming the lids of the axle boxes. Dirty sweaty oilers bustled about, powerful breathing and the horns of locomotives were heard. On the platforms closely, one to another, stood self-propelled guns covered with tarpaulins, long-barreled guns covered with camouflage nets with traces of still factory grease, field kitchens disguised with branches, cars and special vehicles. In some places above the echelons, like hands covering from an airstrike, the barrels of anti-aircraft guns stretched out. On one of the platforms near a blunt, sullen-looking howitzer, tall gunners, wet from the heat and exertion, were fussing about. Young Cossack guardsmen with obligatory forelocks, in caps, somewhere at the very back of their heads, dashingly twisted on one side, and trousers with red stripes, right in the coaches, from where there was a strong smell of manure and horse sweat, cleaned and doused the horses with water. Young sailors in uniforms and vests silently watched their work from the neighboring train with an expression on their faces of high dignity, superiority and obvious disdain. Experienced soldiers with orders, medals, badges of the guards and stripes for wounds on tunics that have turned white from the sun and washing, young fighters of marching companies in brand new uniforms, only from the warehouse, tankers in oiled overalls worn over their naked bodies, infantry officers in field caps with green stars, naval lieutenants in smart midshipmen with golden crabs, pilots in caps with blue edging and chrome headsets. There was just no one here. All this heterogeneous army, guards units that have seen all sorts of things, marching companies and officer teams dressed to the nines, all this brand new, unscratched equipment, everything was moving towards the front, towards difficult and for many the last battles. Stretching a wide strip of its operational rear to the north and southwest, the front, in essence, began already here, only the guns were still silent, and the locomotives were operating. But thoughts of forthcoming battles and of death must have occupied few people. Loud discordant conversations, cheerful and sometimes salty jokes, the sounds of harmonicas and bursts of laughter were heard from all sides. Only those who were on duty on the platforms at the anti-aircraft guns and quadruple machine guns, and even the fighter pilots who patrolled in the sultry sky high above the station, were supposed to think about the enemy. Andrei, not without excitement, expected that the chubby captain and lieutenant would get lost in the crowd and would push between the trains, listening to the conversations and looking closely. However, this did not happen. Leaving the propaganda center, they stood for about 10 minutes on the platform, not approaching the echelons, where in a crowded, very noisy circle, inflamed by the excited cries of the spectators, sweating profusely, two competed in a cheerful dance. An elderly, thick-set, barrel-chested foreman artilleryman, despite for his age, his whole stout figure breathed health and strength, and a small round-headed infantryman, a kind of perky lively, strong man of about 18, with a brand-new Order of Lenin on his tunic. Having wormed their way into the crowd of spectators carried away by the dance, Timantsev and Andrei could now take a close look at the people they were watching. The captain had a fat-cheeked, completely round, with a duck-like nose and small gaps, a woman's face, ugly, but very kind. Behind the lobe of the right ear was a mole the size of a pea. With large greenish eyes he enthusiastically followed the dancers and smiled. Above the right pocket of his tunic there was a yellow patch for a wound, above the left one there was a bar with ribbons of the Order of the Red Star and 2 medals. The lieutenant did not take his eyes off the dancer and laughed heartily, showing a mouth full of even white teeth. There was something tender, girlish in his youthful, soft-lined face, and he suddenly reminded Timantsev of a fair-haired actress who sang the part of a shepherdess in the only opera Timantsev had heard. Both officers were wearing not new, but clean uniforms, fresh collars, and on their feet uniform, mass-tailored cowhide boots, the prints of which, as Timantsev had determined yesterday, undoubtedly had no resemblance to the traces found at the spring. If Andrei looked at the officers mainly with curiosity, then Timantsev worked with concentration. Just in case, he made mental portraits and memorized verbal portraits of both, a difficult task, requiring a sharp eye, experience and observation. 2 young lieutenants ran along the platform, red-haired, stocky, with a bandaged arm in a sling, and thin, round-shouldered, with a pack of newspapers under his arm. Seeing Andrei standing behind the circle of spectators, they rushed to him. "Blinov, you? This is a meeting. Great!" They shouted in turn, shaking Andrei's hand and clapping him on the shoulder. "Where are you?" "3 here," Andrei said embarrassedly. "Look. We thought you were there." The red-haired man pointed to the west with his hand, and both continued. "They said that after the hospital you got into intelligence, behind the front line. And you turn around in the rear. How are you, our guys?" Andrei tried to translate the conversation. 2 months in the battles. You see, the order has increased. They reached East Prussia, the lieutenants chattered. "Why don't you wear yours?" 3 thanks from the Supreme. How is it in the B battalion? Vasek Kekosalapov, tolerant, Skokov? Vasek was killed, and Terpayaki was in the hospital. Naumov lay down on the embrasure, they gave the hero posthumously. And your company commander died, and Feldman. And Basov's legs were torn off. And that was enough for me too. The red-haired man raised his bandaged hand and joyfully announced, gangrene was starting, they almost chopped off 40 people of the old staff, the rest are from the replenishment. We are being transferred near Warsaw. Let's go, you'll see. Our echelon is on the 2nd track. We are leaving soon, on the 2nd P path. Now, guys, let's go. The red-haired man grabbed Andrei by the arm. Now, our guys. 1 minute. I'll come now. Blinov looked longingly after the fleeing officers, he felt tears welling up in his eyes. What are you, Andriusha? Timantsev approached him. "Nothing," Andrew said in a trembling voice. "My peer regiment. I understand. They're going to Warsaw." Vivasek was killed, both the company commander and the battalion commander. Andrei turned his face away, a tear nevertheless crawled out and slid down his cheek. "But look and see, collect cigarette butts." "I don't want to," offendedly delivered Andrei. "P suspected, being tested, the devil himself will break his leg. P damn them, d all of them. Darling, if a cigarette butt is needed for business, it's not a pity to give half your life for it," Timantsev assured, hastily thinking how to defuse the situation, and instantly setting himself up to sham. 31. "I was a H person in the R regiment. I was the best platoon C commanded. And S here is your dependent, and T benefit from me. You treat me badly." Making an offended face and flaring his nostrils, said Timantsev. "And to Pasha too. Why is it poor quality?" Blinov protested. "Because if you seriously think that we are less useful here than on the front line, then, sorry. This is so insulting, there are no words." With an offended air and not without indignation, Timantsev spread his hands, and, feeling that now he must soften, conciliatorily continued. "Drop these frivolous thoughts. What kind of dependent are you? And who stumbled upon these two? Who found the lieutenant? And the trace at the spring? Fool, yes, mentally I applaud you. T what's the point? There will be a sense. As Comrade Christ said, seek and you will find. You understand." Timantsev unexpectedly hugged Andrei and quickly whispered confidentially, "I will teach you shooting in Macedonian style, forceful detention, you will gain experience, operational acumen will appear, but you will not be worth the price. Pasha and I will make a real cleaner out of you. Wolfhound." 32. "Yes, you can take any scab." 33. "With your bare hands." The dance ended abruptly. On the tracks at the echelons, a bugle played invitingly, a command repeated in loud voices sounded, "At the wagons." On the wagons. The harmonica fell silent. The little infantryman, having given up dancing, spat with annoyance, and, catching his breath and wiping his wet face with a handkerchief, stretched out, standing on tiptoe to see. He was called out from the crowd, and, waving his hand to the accordionist, he, pulling his tunic, went up to the foreman artilleryman and, energetically shaking his hand, in a breaking bass voice, smiling, but with chagrin said loudly, "Well, bye. See you, let's dance." And after the harmonist he went out of the circle. The audience dispersed reluctantly. The chubby captain and lieutenant, as if suddenly remembering something, hurried up and, leaving the platform, headed for the city. There was nothing suspicious or even remarkable about their behavior. If at the station they did not listen to conversations, did not look closely and did not show interest in the military echelons, now they walked, talking among themselves, and never once looked back. Nevertheless, Timantsev, as always, acted with great caution. He followed the officers at an extremely long distance. Andrei walked, lagging behind him for another 50 meters. Moving in this way, they left the ruins of an ancient fortress to the right, passed the church and went to the eastern outskirts of the city. Here, not reaching the river, on a quiet village street, the officers, approaching one front garden, opened the gate, went in, locked it and went into the house, and they did all this as usual. Apparently, they lived here or had been here more than once. Timantsev called Andrei with a sign of his hand. "Thank God, it seems they have landed," he said with relief. "You can't get any closer. And stay here too." Turning to the right, he hurriedly looked around and, looking for a cover suitable for observation, turned his eyes to the left. "You'll have to go around, across the river, into those bushes over there. I'll tell the captain how to find you. Let's." 30. Operational documents. Note on HF. Urgently. Igorov, Polyakov. According to the NKGB of the USSR, an underground organization of the Polish government in exile in London, the delegation of Zondu, operates on the territory of southern Lithuania and western Belarus, with one of the main tasks of conducting operational intelligence in the rear of the Red Army and on frontline communications. To transmit information, the delegation has shortwave radio transmitters and complex digital ciphers. One of the leaders of this organization is Marian Kvapinski, who is now in an illegal position in the Vilnius region, born in 1906 or 1908, born. Białystok, a former officer in the Polish army, a lawyer by education, the son of the owner of a large notary office in Krakow. The content of the ciphergram of the radio intercepted on August 13, 1944 with the call signs KAO corresponds to information that is of great interest to the London and Warsaw centers. It is quite possible that the wanted transmitter belongs to the delegate. It is possible that Marian Kvapinski is the notary mentioned in the interception text. Ustinov. Note on HF. Urgently. Igorov. Office of Counterintelligence of the First Baltic Front on August 2 with German paratrooper agents Antanas Gogelis and Vladas Zelnis, who graduated from a reconnaissance and sabotage school stationed 14 kilometers from the city of Bydgoszcz, Bromberg, on the Walden estate, were arrested. On August 11, the counterintelligence agencies of the same directorate captured another group of agents consisting of Lukaitis, Senkevicius, and Yatsunskas, who graduated from the same school. Both groups, transferred to the rear of the front under the guise of officers of the Red Army with the task of operational intelligence, were asked a. Contact the active gangs of Lithuanian German nationalists, the so-called LLA, in order to obtain espionage information from them. b. In order to collect information about the movements of our troops, conduct visual observation on the communications of the Baltic and Belarusian fronts, make shuttle railway routes, in particular on the lines Daugavpils, Białystok, via Vilnius, Grodno, and Vilnius, Brest, via Lida and Baranovichi or Folkovisk. According to the testimonies of those arrested, a special department has been set up in the Waldensian Intelligence School, where people of Lithuanian nationality study, mostly compromised by complicity with the invaders, as a rule, fluent in Russian. The information contained in the ciphergram of the radio intercepted on August 13, 1944 with the call sign KAO corresponds to the tasks received by the groups of A. Gogelis and V. Lukaitis. It is possible that the transmitter you are looking for is used by one of the groups of agents who graduated from the Lithuanian branch of the Waldensian Intelligence School and were transferred to the rear of the front. Please let me know what you think about this version. The Counterintelligence Department of the First Baltic Front was instructed to immediately inform you in detail about all the materials they have on the enemy's Waldensian Intelligence School, and also to hand over to you, if necessary, an identifier from among the agents they arrested. Kalibanov. 31. What does Julia have to do with it? Timantsev with 2 officers was supposed to arrive 1.5 to 2 hours ago. Waiting for them at the appointed place, by the bridge over a tiny stream, Alekhine lay near the side of the deserted cobbled road on the ground that had cooled down, thinking about the matter and wondering why they were so late. It had not yet grown dark, but the low gloomy clouds made it evening ahead of time. He heard the sound of a lorry engine from afar, and after a while, when the noise approached, he went out onto the road. As soon as the car stopped, Timantsev and 2 seconded men jumped out of the back. Captain Fomchenko, a broad-shouldered man, introduced himself, with his head burned to the right from the temple to the back of the head. Senior Lieutenant Luznov, a tall, younger man, drew himself up in front of Alekhine. Like Timantsev, they were without hats, in capes, with PPSH machine guns and knapsacks in their hands. Only Timantsev additionally captured another, Schmeisser, 34. Alekhine must have seen both seconded in the Air Corps Counterintelligence Department. He even remembered that the captain on one of the medals had a dent from a bullet or shrapnel. Turn around and stand here, pointing to the bushes at the Nontork road that branched off perpendicularly, he ordered Kizniak and called the officers, let's go. Along a wide grassy path, crimped on both sides by bushes, they headed for the darkening forest in the distance, Alekhine and Timantsev in front, Fomchenko and Luznov behind them. Why so long? Alekhine asked Timantsev. You can pierce yourself a hole for the order, Timantsev said casually. We found these, the captain and the lieutenant. Who is it? Intrigued by the mention of the order, Fomchenko asked. The suspects, Alekhine explained, more precisely, even the ones being checked. Where are they? We went to house 6 on Vyzvolenia Street. Apparently they've been there before. Blinov is watching them. According to the commandant's office, the captain's surname is Nikolaev, and the lieutenant's name is Sentsov. They arrived from the military unit 31518. The purpose of the trip is indicated as standard, the fulfillment of the task of the command. Blinov can't manage it there, Alekhine sighed. 31518, what is this part? Second Belarusian Front. I made a request. The lieutenant colonel was not there, and therefore was delayed. If they really are from this part, of another front, why are they climbing our farms? Strange. What are your thoughts? Nothing remarkable. They keep themselves calm, at ease. They look like they are not newcomers in the army. They need to be observed, concluded Timantsev. You yourself say, verifiable. Perhaps this will be limited. By the morning there will be an answer. Well, in the morning, it will, Timantsev assured. I myself called by Vesh to the office of the 2nd Belarusian. And he handed it over with the letter, very urgently. Signed by the general. The guardhouse is crying for you, Alekhine shook his head. The war will end, put in jail for half a year, well deserved. I would sleep there. And I would have eaten ryashka, in. Timantsev spread his hands. There are elements of adventurism, he admitted with a sigh, but only for the good of the cause. There is a thunderstorm, turning towards Lida, Alekhine said. That's for sure. A cheerful night is ahead of you. Timantsev examined the dark sky, then the forest ahead, everything around looked gloomy, wildly, and noticed. A great place to relax. Which hotel has rooms prepared for us? Alekhine, as if not hearing, was silent. Order to deliver luggage there, Timantsev did not let up, a masseuse and pedicure operators. They are looking forward to seeing you, Alekhine said, taking Timantsev's tone. Very nice. And what is the order of the motherland? Take Kazimir Pavlovsky and those with him, Alekhine said quite seriously. Who is Pavlovsky? Fomchenko asked. He was obviously inquisitive and, in any case, wanted to be in the know, and Luznov was silent. German intelligence agent, said Alekhine, turning around. The sweetest guy, added Timantsev. 9 successful transfers and 4 pieces of iron from the Germans. Especially dangerous when detained. Somehow, in the mood, he slammed 3 mugs from the commandant's office. Understood, Fomchenko said, somewhat puzzled. Well, Burdocks, Alekhine disagreed. An officer and 2 patrols. You have to keep your ears open with him. I will acquaint you with the orientation and photographs, he promised. We were told, Luznov finally said, there are a lot of gangs here. Truth? They say they are being killed, Timantsev shrugged his shoulders, but we didn't see it. Luznov kept his machine gun at the ready, from time to time poking the barrel into Timantsev's back. Put the fuse on, Alekhine advised him and smiled. Are you a pilot? A pilot, Luznov confirmed, blushing, and moved the bump. 87 sorties, Fomchenko said for him. Commissioned after being wounded. Like me, a sinner. That's it. 87 sorties, and perhaps he didn't hold a machine gun in his hands. Pilots. Okay, say thank you for giving these. They went out to the floor and all 4 stood behind the bushes. On the field, about 200 meters from them, one could see a solid house with an attic, to the left, 2 poor huts, behind them the forest ominously blackened. This is the Pavlovsky house, Alekhine pointed out. He's boarded up, Timantsev remarked. Yes. The owner himself, Pavlovsky Sr., was arrested as a Volksdeutsch. He is sitting in Lida, Alekhine explained to Fomchenko and Luznov. In a smaller hut, Alekhine pointed with his hand, Julia Antoniuk lives. And who is this? Timantsev inquired impatiently. An orphan. She has been in the service of the Pavlovskys since childhood, whether a laborer, or a maid, you will not understand. Has a daughter of 1.5 years. From whom? Timantsev asked. They say that from a German, but I think otherwise. This Julia is the sister of Svirid's wife. By the way, there's his house. And who is this, Svirid? Fomchenko stood up. A friend of the captain, Timantsev remarked ironically. He gave us Pavlovsky. That's it, Alekhine smiled and explained. Fomchenko, a destitute man, a hunchback. Eh, aunt? Timantsev asked anxiously. Casimir has an aunt here somewhere. Not here, but in Kamenka. I prefer Yulia. We simply do not have the strength for 2 ambushes. We don't care where we feed the fleas, here or there. Timantsev spat. Just enlighten me. Don't let me die stupid. Why is Julia here? Why should Pavlovsky appear here? 32, Alekhine. It was hard to admit that, having got to these places after many months of absence, Pavlovsky would not try to meet with any of his relatives or people close to him. But with whom? The father, whom he, according to the peasants, respected and loved, was in prison, the house was boarded up, and from afar it was clear that no one lived there. It should have been assumed that Pavlovsky would try to find out about the fate of his father through someone, most likely through his own aunt, Zofia Basiata. As I found out, Basiata, a devout Catholic, had no sympathy for the Germans, who forbade religious services in the Polish language and cruelly oppressed not only ordinary believers, but also the vicars of God, priests. It was a fact that she, half German, did not sign the Volkslist, as her brother and nephew did, although under the difficult conditions of the occupation, German citizenship provided considerable benefits. She loved her only brother, but her relationship with her nephew, as I understand it, was not the best. Thinking over everything that I managed to find out about the Pavlovskys, Svirids, about their relatives, out of 2 options, Zofia Basiata and Yulia Antoniuk, I gradually leaned towards the second. The fact is that even earlier I had an assumption that Yulia Antoniuk had a daughter from Casimir Pavlovsky. This guess came to me when, having learned who Yulia was, I was considering the text of a note extracted from a pie in the State Security Department. Why would an elderly man sitting in prison, by no means sentimental, tell in a short secret message that the girl of his laborer is healthy? This idea received some confirmation when, on one of the 2 photographs of Pavlovsky brought by Svirid, with some difficulty, made out the inscription erased by someone, the dearest from Kazikh. And below, 1943. Who could be for Pavlovsky Jr., the dearest, in Svirid's house? How did this card get there? It was natural to assume that the photo was presented by Casimir to Yulia. And that a month and a half ago, after Yulia's hasty departure, the card, along with her other things, ended up in Svirid's house. Who and when erased the inscription? Perhaps Yulia, before the arrival of our troops, or maybe Svirid. It is noteworthy that when I demanded to bring a photo of Pavlovsky, he went to the hut, went in there and immediately climbed into the cellar. Undoubtedly, the cards were hidden there. I would give dearly to find out the truth about the relationship between Pavlovsky and Yulia, in order to know for sure who the girl's father is. By the way, Elsa, a very rare name in these places, was called, as I remember from the investigation case, the mother of Yosef Pavlovsky, the grandmother of Casimir. My assumption about the paternity of Pavlovsky Jr. seemed quite probable, but no more. In order to somehow check it, before Timantsev's arrival, I tried to establish the girl's date of birth. She was registered with the headman of Kamensk as having been born on December 30, 1942. In the column Father, of course, there was a dash. Bronislava Svirid was listed as a witness during the recording. This date, unfortunately, did not confirm my guess, on the contrary. This often happens. There are no facts, only assumptions. It is almost impossible to prove or disprove them, but a decision must be made immediately. And you can't make a mistake, and there is no one to consult, to be sure. True, I also had a small argument against the option with Zofia Basiata. Pavlovsky was apparently transferred at the end of July or at the beginning of August, and during this time he could have seen his aunt more than once. Julia appeared here only 2 days ago. I did not at all flatter myself with the illusion that Pavlovsky was brought here only by kindred feelings. Here, for sure, there was a case of an involuntary combination of the personal with the necessary for the cause, the necessary. The Shalovichy forest area is, of course, an excellent place for an undercover transmitter to go on the air, and for a hiding place where this radio can be hidden, and for covert acceptance of cargo from an aircraft. Pavlovsky knew this region well. He knew the forest up to the path, all the entrances and approaches. It was naturally easier and more convenient for him to act here than in another, unfamiliar area. And we should have kept in mind one important circumstance for his capture. He is an experienced person and can only appear here furtively, with the onset of twilight, mainly at night. Timantsev, after listening to my thoughts on the choice of an object for observation, asked a few questions, and when in conclusion I asked him for his opinion, he grunted vaguely. Interesting. This, as I deciphered, meant, I do not share your assumptions and I cannot leave a stone unturned from them. But I won't argue and I won't say a word so as not to demagnetize these two, Fomchenko and Luznov. I defined his attitude correctly. Saying goodbye to me in the bushes near the Pavlovsky house, he said what he usually said in similar situations, doubtful for him, when he did not believe in success. Well, our business is small, and, as if wanting to reassure me, he finally added, they will come, they won't leave. My thoughts were already in Lida. Pavlovsky, of course, is also our bread, and trying to take it is our direct responsibility. However, we did not have any information about his involvement in the work of the transmitter we were looking for, and the radio with the call signs of KAO remained the main task of the group, the main goal of our efforts, and I did not forget about it for a minute. 33. They must be observed. The pre-storm half-light became more and more stuffy and heavy. Residents hurried to take refuge in their homes. The street was deserted and quiet, and the whole city seemed to stand still in anticipation. Blackout was observed carefully, no twinkle, no dim streak of light. Twilight thickened so much that, apart from the dark silhouettes of houses, it was almost impossible to see anything in the distance. Andrei crossed the bridge, crawled like a plastuna behind the bushes and lay down about 20 meters opposite the gate. Soon after he had occupied this very convenient place for observation, someone came out of the house and followed the picket fence in the palisade. No matter how hard Andrei tried, he could not see who it was. Then a huge cat appeared from the side of the house. Stepping silently, he went straight up to the bushes where the young man lay, and with his green eyes, ominously shining in the darkness, looked at the stranger for a minute, then quickly returned to the house. I've scouted it, now I'll report everything, Andrei thought cheerfully. Thank God it's not a dog. A fresh breeze rustled in the leaves, swept and subsided. Minutes later, the first drops of rain, rare and heavy, like peas, splashed on the grass, on the leaves, pounded on the cape. Lightning flashed in a fiery zigzag not far away, and a thunderstorm began. Andrei wrapped himself in a cape, but it was short, and his legs below the knees soon got wet. The storm played out in earnest. Tearing apart the dark bulk of the sky, lightning illuminated the surroundings for a moment, and again everything plunged into darkness, and the thunder impressively shook the earth. The rain poured down like a solid wall, as if in the sky the bottom of some colossal vessel fell off and streams of water fell to the ground. The cloak was soaked through, then everything that Andrei was wearing gradually got wet, the tunic, and the trousers, and the cape, even in the boots it was not clear how water got into. There was no trace of the heat of the day, the cold hazy dampness tightly covered the body. Andrei's teeth were knocking out a frequent fraction, and he was trembling all over. You must not miss anything under any conditions and not decipher yourself, Andrei instructed himself. He remembered the incident with Timantsev in Smolensk. In winter, after the liberation of the city, one of the houses was monitored. According to intelligence data, there was a safe house of German intelligence in it. Timantsev, having taken over, determined that the most convenient place for observation was an old, abandoned latrine in the middle of the yard. Even before dawn, he climbed inside, and his partner locked him, blocking the door with a board, as it was before. The frost was about 20 degrees. When Timantsev tried to warm himself, shifting from foot to foot. It turned out that the dilapidated building creaks and staggers from the slightest movement, and look, it will fall apart. They walked around the yard all the time. In order not to reveal himself, Timantsev had to stand still for more than 10 hours. Information about the safe house was not confirmed, and he recalled this adventure with a smile. Although it ended very sadly for him, he got so cold feet that he lay in the hospital for 2 months, where he almost had his foot amputated. Meanwhile, the storm subsided for a while, only to break out with even greater bitterness. Maliciously violating the disguise, lightning flashed one after another, and somewhere completely overhead a deafening rumble and rumble. It seemed that the rampage of the elements would never end. However, at the 10th hour, the rain stopped as suddenly as it began. The storm moved a little further south, however, there was not a single star in the sky, and a quiet heavy rain did not stop. Distant lightning blazed a little less frequently, each time snatching out of the gloom for a moment the houses and palisades dark from the rain. With one of the flashes, Andrei saw a figure in a cape walking in the rain, and when everything was plunged into darkness again, he realized that it was Alekin. He had come and was looking for him. I had to make myself known somehow. Andrei remembered the conditional signals for the forest, but he had no idea how to do it now, in the city. Only about 10 minutes later the captain, who was looking for him in the darkness almost gropingly, approached so much that Andrei made up his mind and quietly called out to him. "Well, are they in the house?" Alekin inquired first of all. "Why yes," Andrei said, trying not to chatter his teeth. Nobody came out. "Order." "Then order," Alekin said with relief, wrapping himself in a cape, and lay down on the wet ground next to Andrei. Glowing green hands showed 9:45. "Is it really necessary to wallow here in the mud until morning, shivering from cold and damp?" Doubt about the need to monitor the house at night overcame Andrei. Time passed unbearably slowly. It seemed to Andrei that the clock had stopped. He raised it to his ear, heard an even ticking and peered into the darkness again. "That's bullshit," he thought sadly. "They sleep peacefully for themselves, and you are cold." Alekin lay motionless a meter away from him on the other side of the bush. With flashes of lightning, the profile of his high-cheeked face, covered up to the very eyes by a hood, was visible. Finally, Andrei became unbearable, and in a voice trembling from the cold, he hesitantly called. "T comrade sea captain." Alekin stirred and asked in a whisper. "What? Do you think someone will come out?" "I think we need to continue watching," the captain said, and Andrei regretted asking this question. "But sea walking is forbidden until morning," he tried to somehow argue. "You went yesterday, did anyone detain you? And even more so in the rain." "You warm yourself," the captain suggested. "No noise. And don't get up." Andrei, thinking, rolled onto his back and crawled on his cape, moving his arms and legs quickly and with effort, but he did not need to warm up. "Quiet." Alekin grabbed him by the shoulder. The light of a dim yellow strip escaped from the house and immediately went out. Through a sparse veil of rain, the captain at some point managed to notice the figures of 2 people in the doorway. Someone left the house. Alekin squeezed Andrei's hand. But in vain they peered intently into the darkness. Nothing could be seen 3 paces away. Through the quiet, measured sound of the rain, footsteps were barely audible, and quite indistinctly, a conversation in an undertone. Someone was walking from the house to the gate. Alekin squeezed Andrei's hand painfully. The steps were getting closer. "You will succeed." "It's almost an hour before the train," a male voice was heard softly, but clearly. "Maybe in the trade lane," another answered with a strong Polish accent. The gate creaked. "Happy arrival. Davidzenia." Moments later, a slow glow of lightning illuminated a dark figure behind the picket fence, returning to the house and coming out of the gate. He was a short, fat man in a canvas coat and black cap. He walked, feeling the way with a stick. The collar of his cloak was turned up. "Follow him," Alekin whispered quickly into Andrei's ear. "Don't touch him before the station. And when he gets on the train, you need to check his documents. Run to the commandant and ask me to check on my behalf." Only the whole car, and not just him, you understand? In any case, we need to establish his identity. Under a plausible pretext and without noise. He seems to be a Pole and kind of a railway worker. Be careful. Go. Andrei got up and, leaving Alekine's cape, cautiously moved after the unknown. He walked blindly, shivering from the cold. Wet trousers and a tunic tightly fitted the body, water sloshed in swollen boots. At each flash of lightning, he, hastily bending down, almost lay down on the ground and saw that the man in the raincoat, without turning around, was walking 50 paces ahead. Andrei heard him, apparently having fallen or stumbled, and swore strongly in Polish. Then it began to seem to the young man that the sound of footsteps was becoming quieter, moving away. Andrei quickened his pace and at the same moment slipped, trying to maintain balance, waving his arms. His whole body twitched and flew into the ditch. He hurt his right cheekbone and eyebrow. Liquid cold mud covered his face. Mentally cursing this night and bad weather, spitting, he groped for a puddle, washed his face and dried himself with his sleeve. The rain had almost stopped, a locomotive hummed somewhere ahead, and that was it. No footsteps were heard. Andrei stood for a few moments, listening, and in great excitement rushed forward. A gap appeared in the sky in the clouds. One could now make out the dark silhouettes of houses on either side. Suddenly, rustling footsteps were distinctly heard in front and somewhat to the right. Turned. Andrei realized and, having reached the corner, went to the right, in the direction from which the steps came. So he moved for about 5 minutes, trying to step quietly and, in order to keep his distance, stopping twice and listening to the sand crunching under the feet of the one walking in front. Lightning flashed, and, oh horror! Andrei saw ahead of him a stately figure in an overcoat. He rushed to catch up. How to get to the station Pass? Andrei shouted. Directly, came quite close, and what was completely unexpected, a ringing girlish voice. Woman, who are you? Andrei said and, since she did not answer, he asked, why do you go at night? Why are you? Need? I am an officer. And I'm a foreman. She lit a flashlight and illuminated Andrei. In her right hand he saw a pistol. Well, what a look you have. She gasped. Go forward. Where forward? I can't stand strangers behind my back at night. Forward. And hurry up, she said imperiously, I'm late for the train. 34, Guard Lieutenant Blinov. There were several trains at the station and only one passenger train Minsk, Grodno. The unknown person could have tried to leave with a train, but Andrei decided to first inspect the Grodno train. A steam locomotive was already being brought to the train. At the cubicle, Andrei put his head under the tap, washed his tunic, trousers and boots, and got down to business. There was no light in the cars. Fortunately for Andrei, the moon emerged from behind the clouds, and one could see not only the figures of people, but also some faces. Almost all the shelves were occupied, but in general there were few passengers. They slept even in the lower places. In any case, establish his identity. Anyway. Andrei kept repeating to himself, walking along the carriage and looking around at the passengers with feverish haste. He started from the tail, looking through the 11th and 10th cars, moved to the 9th and, almost stumbled upon a man in a raincoat. He was standing in the second compartment, half turned to the aisle. The reflected light of the moon illuminated it. Andrei, without stopping, walked on, having time, however, to notice the crossed hammers on the black railway cap, the raised collar of the cloak, and even made out the large, fleshy face of the unknown. He no longer had a stick in his hands, and Andrei understood from his posture that he had decided to sit in this compartment on the middle free shelf. Andrei's heart was beating happily. It's him. Now set the identity. Car number 9. Andrei looked at his watch. 11 minutes remained before the train left. The station commandant was housed in a small hut near the checkpoint on the tracks. It was an elderly, dark-faced captain with gray temples and a scar on his cheek. Andrei had already seen him twice. Now, leaning over a massive desk, by the light of a lightning lamp, he entered some information from a notebook onto a huge, half-table table. On the left, on a dirty, indeterminate color sofa, sitting with his head hanging low and snoring softly, the senior lieutenant was sleeping, judging by the red cap, an officer of the commandant's office. Comrade Captain, Andrei asked, putting his hand on the cap, allow me. Wait. The commandant interrupted with displeasure. Something was not going well with him. He leafed through a notebook in excitement and fidgeted in his chair. You can wait? With irritation, not that asked, not that he ordered. Andrei stood for some time in indecision, straightening the tunic stuck to his body, touched his swollen under eye and eyebrow with his finger, then glanced at his watch. 5 minutes remained before the train left. I can't wait. Unexpectedly for himself, Andrei announced loudly. What-oh? The commandant threw up his head in surprise and looked at Andrei. What do you need? Laying his soaked ID on the table, Andrei hurriedly and inconsistently outlined the essence of the matter, twice mentioning Alekin's name. Only the 9th? The commandant asked. Nikitin. He called. The officer sleeping on the sofa did not move. Nikitin. Yelled the commandant. Damn it. Yes, wake him up. The senior lieutenant raised his head heavily and, rubbing his eyes and screwing up his eyes, looked at Andrei sleepily. He was short and young, no more than 23 years old. Nikitin, ordered the commandant, take 2 patrols, check the 9th car in Grodno. One guy is driving there, you need to find out who he is. Do you understand? Be careful. The lieutenant will explain. You check the whole car from both ends. The commandant looked at his watch. Now they will give the departure, hurry. In extreme cases, you will delay for 5 minutes, but no more. Where are you from? Nikitin asked, yawning loudly and pulling up his pants, following Andrei out of the office. From counterintelligence. You all play spies. He chuckled knowingly, glancing at the young man's wet uniform. And what a jester, you cannot sleep. With feeling annoyed he, with 2 patrol sergeants, they left the barracks. Passed on the 3rd track from them, picking up speed, rolled cars of a passenger train. 2-2. Let's go, Nikitin whistled, stopping, and, pointing with his hand, as if happily announced, here he is, Grodno. 3 behind me. Andrei shouted, running up to the train. On the move he jumped on the step and, pushing open the door, climbed into the vestibule, pushing away a woman in a headscarf, who rushed into the car in fright. He felt in the darkness for the stopcock handle and pulled it down. The train braked sharply. Something fell in the carriage, alarming exclamations were heard, a child screamed furiously. But Andrei did not hear anything. Jumping to the ground, he ran to the 9th carriage. While Nikitin was talking to the head of the train who came to the rescue, Andrei looked into the carriage. The railroad worker was in the same compartment. Now he was without a cloak and without a cap. Andrei decided, just in case, not to climb into his eyes and, having agreed with Nikitin, he began the check from the other end of the car. The passengers were mostly civilians. Everyone was awakened by the abrupt stop of the train and gossiped about it. Various assumptions have been made. The sergeant shone his lantern. Andrei mechanically looked through the documents and just as mechanically asked the stereotyped questions put in such cases. Where are you going from? Where? Who issued the pass? And so on. Mentally, he was at the other end of the car. No one demanded a mandate for the right to check. Andrei was already checking the 3rd compartment when the train started moving again. Lieutenant, shouted Nikitin, let's go. Andrei, realizing that everything had already been done, hurried to leave the car after the patrol. Pass, armor, everything is in order, Nikitin reported to the commandant when Andrei entered the office. Seconded from the station Kotelnik, follows in Grodno to the place of permanent service. With wife and 2 kids. Where are the children from? What wife? Andrei interrupted in astonishment and bewilderment. Can't be. The one you mentioned. In the 2nd compartment. Low, fat. Railwayman. There were no others. Is he a Pole? Pole? Nikitin laughed heartily. Vyatsky. You can see him, our brother, Vanka. Stop it. Severely stopped the commandant. You are being asked seriously. Did you set a last name? But how? Shishkov Fedor Alexeyevich, 96th year, originally from Zuevka, Vyatka province. They landed in Minsk, the conductor confirmed. And here he got out for boiling water. You missed him on the way, Alekhine concluded after listening to Andrei. They lay again in the cold, wet grass, watching the house. It hasn't dawned yet. On the train, you came across another, probably similar, the captain continued gloomily. Everything else was wasted. 35, still, let's put an end. Leaving Blinov to watch, Alekhine on a lorry, Kizniak had been sleeping in the car on a neighboring street since the evening, rushed in the pre-dawn twilight to the airfield. Wet uniforms stuck to the body with a cold compress. During the night he was so cold, he was beating like a fever. Now I would go for a run to warm up, but there was no time. The city has not woken up yet. All the way to the airfield, he met only 4 single military, not a single civilian, and 2 trucks with night passes on their windshields. Polyakov, as in his office, in a tunic without a belt, with an unbuttoned collar, sat at a table in the curtained office of the head of the counterintelligence department of the Air Corps and conjured over a sheet of paper. To Alekhine's greeting, he raised his head and absent-mindedly replied, "Hello." "Sit down. They are in the house," Alekhine said. "Frozen? If I hadn't been trembling, would have completely frozen," Alekhine joked. "Here, warm up." Polyakov pushed towards him a trophy, with an idyllic Bavarian landscape, a pinkish thermos, known, probably, to the entire directorate. "And take a bun." Alekhine poured strong fragrant tea from a thermos into a glass, brewed by the lieutenant colonel personally according to some special method of his own, sank into a chair at the side table and, putting a piece of sugar in his mouth, took a few sips with pleasure. In front of Polyakov lay a piece of paper with probably 10 lines, crossed out, with inserts, corrections, and 2 question marks in blue pencil. Alekhine glanced briefly, thinking that this was obviously a text for one of the points of the radio game, a matter so confidential and secret that he did not even bother to look at it again. He knew that each letter in such documents is approved by Moscow, agreed, if it contains misinformation, with the general staff, but Polyakov must think over and draw up the text, all responsibility is on him, and Alekhine regretted that he had come at the wrong time. He admired in Polyakov's ability to concentrate under any circumstances, to disconnect from everything that was secondary at the moment, and the main thing for the lieutenant colonel now was, obviously, these scribbled lines. After hesitating, Alekhine took a bun lying forlornly on a saucer, a small one from the officer's canteen. He was so cold and hungry that he would have eaten a dozen of these little ones, or even more. Dumplings similar in shape were also baked at home, only not on a baking sheet, but in an oven, also from wheat flour, but rustic, not machine-grinded. Those, of course, were incomparably tastier, especially with sour cream. He remembered how in spring or autumn, chilled, he would return at dusk from the fields to the warmth of his native hut, and the joyful cry of his daughter, and unusual cabbage soup, and hot pancakes, and salted milk mushrooms, and kvass. All this now seemed illusory, completely unreal. Yesterday they went on the air again, Polyakov suddenly announced calmly. "Where?" Alekhine choked on a piece of bread in surprise. 40 kilometers east of the Shilovichi forest. Polyakov raised his head, and Alekhine saw that he had switched and was now thinking about the radio he was looking for. The transmission was carried out from the movement, obviously from a car. It is curious that not a single case of theft has been recorded over the past 3 days. Is there a decryption? Alekhine asked quickly. Not yet. They change the encryption key every time. You drink. And pour some more. Thanks. What time did they air? Between 17:20 and 17:45. Nikolaev and Sentsov were in the city at that hour, Alekhine stated, under our supervision. They have a solid alibi in this case. By the way, they already have the answer. How quickly they did it, huh? They report here, to Lida, but for some reason in the name of the general. Strange. Someday he will run into. Understanding Timantsev, Alekin thought angrily and immediately noted to himself that if it were not for the elements of adventurism, the answer would not be earlier than another day. And Polyakov had already taken out a piece of paper from the folder and read. Captain Nikolaev and Lieutenant Sentsov, whom you are checking, are indeed serving in Military Unit 31518. They are currently sent to the area of the city of Lida for the purpose of decentralized procurement of agricultural products for the headquarters canteen. So their appearance on the farms is quite understandable, said Polyakov. We do not have any compromising materials on the persons you are checking. So, it turns out, a day wasted. Alekin said sadly. I have to leave for Grodno now, Polyakov said, as if justifying himself. I will obviously return to the office at night. Be sure to call. I'm really looking forward to the decryption of the first and yesterday's intercepts. Look here in the afternoon, he advised, perhaps something will happen. Or maybe they are not who they say they are. Maybe there are 4 in the group and 2 others were transmitting from the movement yesterday? Still, let's put an end to it. I'll take a look at them point blank and feel the documents, Alekin suggested. He looked at Polyakov, waiting for approval, but he seemed to go back into his lines. Decentralized procurement of agricultural products in the rear of another front is amateur activity, and illegal. I wonder what they will tell me about the purpose of the business trip. I'll grab someone from the commandant's office, Alekin continued stubbornly, for a look, we'll go into neighboring houses. That makes sense, Polyakov agreed, raising his head. But don't waste your time. 36, Alekin. To the mistress of house number 6 on Vyzvolenia Street, Pani Grolinskaya, I went with one of the officers of the city commandant's office, a middle-aged, completely bald and very intelligent captain, who understood everything perfectly. He spoke Polish fluently, obviously having performed similar roles many times, and if he had treated me without some subservience, it would have been a real pleasure to work with him. In order not to arouse suspicion, we also visited all the neighboring houses, 10 or 11, although, according to the curfew, only 3 of them housed military personnel. As always, the masking, staging a total check, took up most of the time. The early sun glittered in millions of droplets on the grass, on the leaves and on the roofs, but still did not warm at all. Somewhere out there, at the end of the street, in the wet cold mugs, behind the ditch, was Blinov. He lay well. I glanced in that direction 4 times, but I could not determine where he was. As at night, my thoughts kept returning to Timantsev. We here, in fact, did not risk anything, but in the event of the appearance of at least one Pavlovsky, a fierce battle was ahead. I couldn't help thinking about Timantsev. However, there is doubt whether the object for the ambush was chosen correctly there. Are we pulling a dummy? And to this day has not left me. Pani Grolinskaya, for her 60 years of age, very youthful and fit, at this early hour was busy cleaning, hanging rugs on the picket fence. She just began to knock them out. We greeted each other. The captain said that we were from the commandant's office, on questions of quartering, and asked if the lady had any military at her quarters. Yes, she answered cheerfully. And the permission of the commandant's office? A document? We inquired almost simultaneously. Please, sir. She invited us into the house with a smile. As we approached her palisade, I noticed behind the house, on a neighboring plot, an elderly woman fiddling in the garden and muttering something in annoyance in Polish. Seeing us, she straightened up and, looking unkindly with her large bright eyes, muttered even louder in indignation. Together with Pani Grolinskaya, we went into a room furnished with good old-fashioned furniture. The first thing that caught my eye, already in the kitchen, was cleanliness and neatness. From the house book lying in the chest of drawers, the hostess took out a small piece of paper, a coupon with the stamp of the commandant's office, and handed it to the captain. Please, sir. He looked and handed it to me. In the upper column of the ticket was inscribed, Mr. Nikolaev, Lieutenant Sentsov. The permit expired at midnight, the captain reminded me in an undertone. Where are they? I managed and looked at the door to another room. I had no doubt that the real or imaginary Nikolaev and Sentsov heard and listened to our conversation. After all, they were not sleeping on such a beautiful morning, at 8 o'clock. Officers? They left. Here you are, grandmother, and St. George's Day. How did you leave? I tried to keep calm. Obviously, in those 1.5 hours when I was absent. So, Blinov followed them. It's difficult and risky, on deserted streets. When did you leave? At night. Incredible. We were lying literally 10 meters from the gate. Something was wrong here, we could not miss them. And Mrs. Grolinskaya said that these officers said goodbye to her late yesterday evening, and she had already cleaned the room after them. They moved to another apartment, where they already stayed once in July, because she does not have a suitable barn, and they need a cattle barn for the day. Like, these officers are engaged in the preparation of food for their part, travel around the district and buy mainly sheep and pigs, and yesterday a car was supposed to arrive at night. They will collect everything from the villages to Lida, load it and take it away. She did not fail to notice that she had never kept any animals, except for pedigree hunting dogs. Her late husband was fond of them. Saying that she had already cleaned up after the officers, she opened the door to the next room, 2 neatly made beds, a table, flowers on the window, order and cleanliness. Of course, she could not make up this story about the harvesting of sheep and pigs, which was quite consistent with the purpose of the trip of the real Nikolaev and Sentsov. Undoubtedly, she repeated what she heard from her guests. The only question is whether this is true or just a legend covering their other activities. I knew many cases when enemy agents acted in the front line under the guise of all kinds of quartermasters, representatives of Army Economic Services. Decentralized harvesting of agricultural products is an excellent cover for movement and reconnaissance in the operational rear. Last year's incident was also fresh in my memory. Looking for a German reconnaissance group according to radio interception, we suspected 3 people who had impeccable equipment and all officer documents. They made a request, and we were confirmed that such and such really serve in the unit, and that they went on a business trip for a month, to the area you indicated, 9 days ago. It is good that we were not satisfied with this answer. As it turned out later, those who served were killed on the 2nd day after leaving the unit. Their corpses were lowered under the ice, and documents, in particular travel orders, were successfully used by 3 persons we suspected until the moment of arrest. Identity cards, ration certificates, and duffel books in the name of the dead they filled out themselves, using spare sets of documents, reserve blank forms received from the Germans. Like most elderly Poles, Pani Grolinskaya spoke good Russian, and answered without pause or thought, and behaved with dignity and pleasant coquetry. In a light apron over a dark strict dress, flexible beyond her age, easy in her movements, she looked like a schoolgirl. Her face was proud, delicate, and pleasant. In the city police department, where I dropped in before the commandant's office, I, as sometimes happens, was lucky. The assistant on duty at the city department, a middle-aged lieutenant, served the site where Vyzvolenia Street entered, and instead of brief installation data, which I could count on at such an early hour, I found out about the mistress of house number 6, probably everything that was known about her to the locals' authorities. Grolinskaya Stefonia, born in 1883, a native of Białystok, from a family of a small-scale gentry, education, a women's gymnasium, a milliner by profession, owned a small tailoring studio before the war, which burned down in the first week of hostilities. During the occupation, she lived in Lida, worked as a sewer for women's clothing. The husband was 10 or 12 years younger than her. This detail was especially noted by the district police officer. In the large room where we talked, there were several photographs hanging on the wall. I managed to slowly make out the faces depicted on them, singled out and remembered 3. On the high bank of the river, leaning on his elbow, lay a handsome, stern old man. I easily recognized Pilsudski in him. To the mistress of the house, an elderly Polish woman, he, in all likelihood, presented himself as a national hero. In another picture, above the carcass of a dead wild boar, a dapper man with a mustache and slick hair, in a hunting suit, with a gun and a bandolier, flaunted, a foppish, self-satisfied face, as I assumed, the husband of the lady, Tadeusz Grolinski. And there were also 2 photographs of a young man with a pensive, sad face, obviously, the son of the hostess, who was allegedly underground somewhere near Warsaw, occupied by the Germans. The fact that Pani Grolinska was not afraid to keep a photograph of Pilsudski on the wall strengthened my attitude towards what she said. In many ways, I believed her. It is not clear how these 2, Nikolaev and Sentsov, passed us unnoticed. Pani Grolinskaya commanded respect and, moreover, sympathy. It was hard for me to understand that the husband of this charming, well-bred, once, no doubt, extremely beautiful woman was an ordinary prison guard, as they said, illiterate and stupid. In addition to drinking and hunting, he was allegedly not interested in anything in life. However, Pan Tadeusz died in September 1939 in battles with the Germans. He died, almost throwing himself under a tank with a grenade, and they remembered him, according to the district police officer, as a hero. Where do you place officers? I asked. Here. More, sir. We went into a freshly cleaned room. The beds were made with clean, unused linen. The rugs from here hung on the picket fence. In the ashtray on the table, no cigarette butt, no ashes, no moat. And nowhere are there any traces of yesterday's guests. Meanwhile, an elderly woman in the adjacent area, she was still in the garden right in front of the window of this room, seeing her neighbor in the window, began shouting something in Polish indignantly with new energy. The captain listened and quietly gave me a sign. But with all my desire, I could not understand what it was about. Przepraszam, lords, Grolinskaya apologized with a smile. She looked out the window and said, Hex puppy, Pani, yush calm down. She was stupidity denervu shen Pani sheshlo godanen, 35. And, turning to us, she again apologized with a smile, Przepraszam, lords. Well, I said, gradually looking around everything in the room, the conditions for 2 people are good. Quite, the captain confirmed, making some notes in the office notebook for appearances. But they didn't send more than 2 people here. So I write it down. The room is bright, clean. How many meters are there? 12, said the hostess. The woman in the neighboring area continued to swear, and I defiantly looked out the window. Please, sir, do you hear how she is worried? Grolinskaya said, trying to smile. What happened there? I asked. Nothing. They are not bandits, but Radets officers. Think, stepped on the garden. It's dark at night. Damaged the beds, the captain prompted. Did they leave through her precinct? So. It's closer to the center. Why am I to blame? It's necessary to put up, it's necessary. They're military men. A lot of questions swirled in my head. I would very much like to know what those who were listed in the commandant's office as Nikolaev and Sentsov are in reality, and, of course, where they are now, and all the details of their behavior and conversations in this house, and why they left at night through the neighboring section, and who was that railwayman in a raincoat, why did he come, and where is he now, and what is the relationship between him and these 2 officers. And there is much more I would like to know, and I would like to talk about many things with Pani Grolinskaya, but now I could only be interested in a certain range of questions, only what an officer of the commandant's office, who checks the order of placing military personnel in private apartments, is supposed to know. We were already leaving. Following the captain, I crossed the threshold of the room, reflecting on what I heard and saw in this house, and then in the kitchen my breath literally took my breath with excitement. Near the tiled stove, in the corner, in a flat trash box, next to the scoop, I saw a crumpled sheet of cellophane, a well-known cellophane wrapper. Thank you for downloading the book from the royalib.com free e-library, http://royalib.com. Leave a review about the book, https://royalib.com/Bogomolov_Vladimir/moment_is-teeny.html. All books by the author, https://royalib.com/author/Bogomolov_Vladimir.html. Notes. 1. Hereinafter, the vultures indicating the degree of secrecy of documents, resolutions of officials and official notes, departure time, who transmitted, who received, and others, as well as document numbers, are omitted. In the documents, and in the text of the novel, several surnames, the names of 5 small settlements and the actual names of military units and formations have been changed. Otherwise, the documents in the novel are textually identical to the corresponding authentic documents. 2. SMERSH, short for Death to Spies. The name of the Soviet military counterintelligence in 1943 to 1945. Full name, Counterintelligence SMERSH NPO USSR. The bodies of SMERSH reported directly to the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, People's Commissar of Defense IV Stalin. 3. The Home Army, AK, is an underground armed organization of the Polish government in exile in London, operating in Poland, southern Lithuania, and the western regions of Ukraine and Belarus. In 1944 to 1945, following the instructions of the London Centre, many AK detachments carried out subversive activities in the rear of the Soviet troops. They killed soldiers and officers of the Red Army, as well as Soviet workers, engaged in espionage, committed sabotage and robbed civilians. Often, the Akovtsi were dressed in the uniform of the Red Army. 4. HF, exact name, HF communication, high-frequency telephone communication. 5. Since September 20, 1944, Grodno, Lida and the Shilovichi district, Grodno region. 6. Cleaner, from to clean, to clear the areas of the forward and operational rear from enemy agents, is a slang designation for a military counterintelligence detective. Hereinafter, predominantly specific, narrowly professional jargon of military counterintelligence detectives. 7. Veski, villages, Belarusian. 8. Bad, Polish. 9. Firewood, short firewood for furnaces. 10. Must be, Polish. In western Belarus, it was also used in the meaning, may, maybe. 11. The name of the reactionary regime in Poland in 1926 to 1939, established under the false slogan of health. 12. I don't understand. I don't know, Polish. 13. ROA, Russian Liberation Army. 14. PPSH, Spadgen submachine gun. 15. Upper flare, the ability of a dog to catch smells in the air, and not on the trail, hunt. 16. Error triangle, a triangle formed synchronously by the points of intersection of the tracking bearings to the required transmitter. 17. Souplesse is the flexibility of the body. It is produced by special training exercises that increase the mobility of the spine and the elasticity of the intervertebral cartilage discs, the entire articular ligamentous apparatus and the muscular system. 18. Article 162 of the Criminal Code of the RSFSR of that time provided for criminal liability for theft of property. 19. Radio game, the use of a captured radio and a radio operator to misinform the enemy. 20. How did they spread the antenna? Did you see it? German. 21. No way. German. 22. I am a mechanic, I worked in a factory. German. 23. Radio. Colonel, please consider that I am a mechanic, a working person. I have 3 children, and I must definitely return. German. 24. 2 paragraphs of this document are omitted. 25. Undercover intelligence terms. Flanners are agents who collect intelligence information, mainly on the movement of troops and equipment, moving from station to station, without stopping anywhere for a long time so as not to attract attention to themselves. Minibuses, unlike flâneurs, conduct visual observation mainly on the way, when traveling in trains and echelons. 26. Stationary observation, systematic visual observation at one point. 27. Beautiful, Polish. 28. Ausweis, an identity card issued to residents in the territory temporarily occupied by the Germans. 29. I fall at the legs of a beautiful lady, I apologize, lady, I kiss the hands, Polish. 30. Blow a bubble, lose orientation, get lost. 31. Professional, to play, portray something for any purpose. 32. Wolfhound is a detective capable of taking alive a strong, well-armed and actively resisting enemy. 33. Parsh, paratrooper agent, more common, a strong opponent capable of putting up serious resistance. 34. Schmeisser, German machine gun,